also have my colleague Liam Ryan on the call as well, who'll be doing just a couple of these introduction slides. So I will hand over to Liam Ryan for these first couple of slides as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. And thank you to Aaron and Calvin, as well as Huron as well. So as Andrew mentioned, my name is Liam Ryan. I'm the Growth and Marketing Manager for Avolution, based in Singapore. And just want to give you a bit of background information, of course, about Avolution and our EA tool ABACUS before we jump into Andrew's main presentation today. So as a bit of background information, ABACUS has been a tool that has been leading enterprise architecture for close to 20 years now. We've been in the industry for 19 years, coming up to 20 years at the end of this year. And we've grown from being an organization which was a spin-off from the University of Technology in Sydney, Australia, as many software tools are, generally spun off from universities. But we're now a fully private company and we have over 7 offices worldwide. So those include, of course, Sydney, Australia, Singapore, where I'm calling in from today, London, where Andrew is calling in from, as well as Dubai, the United States, as well as South America. So we have quite a good distribution across the globe. As Calvin mentioned earlier in his slides, we are a leader in the Gartner Magic Quadrant, and we've also been lucky enough and have been honored with the Forrester Wave leader position as well for quite a few years now. We do have clients, of course, spanning over 100 different countries, and we have worked with clients or worked with over 3,000 different companies as well to date. So we have a good spread across multiple industries as well, not only, of course, in banking and government, which are 2 of our largest sectors, but across a multitude, including technology, as well as infrastructure, government, as I mentioned, and quite a few others as well, which are probably in subsectors too. So with that, I'll pass over to Andrew and we'll kick off the rest of the presentation.
Perfect. Thanks, Liam. So yes, hi everyone. I'm Andrew Lewthwaite. I work as a consultant for Avolution. So taking part in, of course, webinars like this, helping our customers deploy ABACUS, which is the tool that we produce. And of course, in this case now, I'm going to go through some slides to talk about, I guess, digital transformation in line with TOGAF, giving some examples. But towards the end of the slides, I'll also just give you a sneak preview of a demo of ABACUS as well. So that should hopefully give you some ideas of the slides that Aaron presented and how we can actually utilize some of that knowledge within the tool. The first place I want to start, though, is how does transformation actually affect you? And this can vary from whether you are a consumer of information or if you are a business facing. And typically, if we pick on a specific industry, something like fintech, in the last couple of years or last 5 years or so, there've been a number of startups that have happened within the financial industry. Now, in one way, this was a large transformation, a large digital transformation shift. These companies that you'll see on the screen here were typically startup banks. They had no ATMs, they had no branches, they had no physical cards at the beginning. It was simply an app on your phone that you could then actually consume banking capabilities and more recent times, including things like loans and mortgages that they've moved into. So there's been really a big shift here from how traditional financial organizations might work and the speed at which these organizations can pop up. And these are actually all over the world as well. There's a couple here in Europe and the UK, and these are across the US and Asia as well. But certainly from a fintech perspective, this has been where digital transformation has affected people and organizations. And I don't think, when we talk about things like this, we should see it as a bad thing. It's challenging the industry to make sure that they are also adapting and changing to effectively what Aaron's been saying at the start. What are the business needs? What are the customer needs? And how do we actually adapt around that? Now, there are consequences to this, and there are consequences to digital transformation, including when we had things like dating apps pop up, certainly parts of the restaurant industry, certainly noticed the impact on them there because no longer were they hosting these types of events. You also have the impact on things like news outlets. Again, Aaron mentioned you can Google anything these days, so you can get any type of information at your fingertips. So traditional news outlets, magazines, newspapers have also seen that decline as well. There's also a consideration to be made on the actual consumer or the customer side. So those fintech companies that started up, the ability to process a loan, the ability to simply, on some other companies, delay payments for things that you purchase, has that knock-on effect from the customer side. And there was a stat that was released a few years ago around the 4 times increase of people ending up in debt via these types of apps and via this technology transformation that has made things easier, but so much easier that you fall into these traps. There's also industries such as the photography industry. Certainly some of the companies that would hail themselves as being the best photographers, let's say, and now in everyone's smartphone, you probably have a professional grade camera that you could actually utilize. These are all technology transformations that have happened and are continuously happening as well. We can take a larger example here. So one of the biggest industries actually undergoing digital transformation, or certainly a shift in transformations, is the car industry or the automotive industry. Now, when we really think about this, one of the first things that we think of is, oh yes, of course, automatic cars. That's exactly the digital transformation that's happening. And that's exactly what's happening across a lot of the global companies and the bigger companies like Apple and Google. Although the automatic cars part is arguably the least shift in digital transformation. The biggest shift really is in the platform that these cars have become. So cars now are on the cutting edge, car manufacturers or companies like Google are on the cutting edge of things like camera technology, semiconductors, neural networks. All of these are platforms that are then used within these cars. So not always should we be seeing the immediate technology transformation that's happening, i.e. a shift from maybe manual to automated cars. We're actually seeing the shift of the technology behind that. We'll come back to some of the technology aspects later on, but the first thing to maybe quickly clarify is the industries that we work in, or the industries that you work in, will all go through some kind of digital transformation. We effectively are working in this digital economy. So whether it's agriculture for sensors in farms and agriculture, whether it's the transport industry, which probably has taken a bit of a hit these last few years, but certainly they're needing to now shift forward to make sure that they survive. Retail industries, manufacturing, technology industries themselves have to shift, because not only were technology industries maybe well known for producing semiconductors, now they have to compete with people like car manufacturers. So there's a whole area where these digital transformations occur. And that's really just how this affects, in theory, everyone that's potentially on this call. So digital transformation, I guess, was what we might classify as an eventuality. And now it's actually just become a necessity. A key part of this transformation is the strategy versus execution argument. And there's a few statistics that we pulled together here around what people see as the best plan. So should you build a very impressive strategy up front, or should you start executing as soon as possible? The more studies you read, the more you might find that execution is actually the key here. But more interestingly, I think, is that a lot of senior executives feel relatively comfortable that their organizations are actually prepared for this shift. If you speak to some of the IT personnel, a third of those believe that their senior executives would be concerned if they had a better understanding of their departments. And that's a key misunderstanding or misalignment there between what the business thinks it wants to do and what currently is needed to be done, or what technology maybe exists. So typically, maybe strategy used to win over execution, but the speed at which things change these days, execution becomes much more important. Now, of course, it is always important to have a plan, and we'll discuss how that might look, but you clearly can see that both are needed But if you do have that best plan and you have no way of executing it, then of course you're not going to get anything out of that. So again, you're just trying to make sure that you can adapt quickly to these types of changes, and both are needed. So why aren't some customers or some consumers ready for this? Well, a lot of the time there's a lack of commitment, resources, or in this case, maybe technology that's maybe stalling or blocking some of the transformations that are trying to go ahead. One of the ways that we can actually help to be ready for this is to actually understand the vision. What does the company actually want to achieve? How do we actually effectively allocate those types of resources? How do we become more efficient to make sure that what we do have in place executes that vision? And arguably more important is use the right tech at the right time. Technology is always going to be seen as something that most organizations want to adopt when newer technologies come on board. Whether that's things like RPA, microservices, those types of areas are, I would say, important to understand, but it should be treaded lightly in the sense that which technology you use is important. Okay. And that's evident from some examples here. So you shouldn't just adopt the technology just because it exists. So technology, as I said, should be an enabler for these types of transformation. You should understand what is the business need, what is the business value of these technologies, and understand how they can be best placed. There's a couple of examples here. I'll focus on one of them, which is Juicero. This is an organization a couple of years ago now, and they sold a juicing machine. So they would have this machine that you could have in your kitchen. They would sell subscriptions to these juice packages that you could buy and put into the machine, and it then extract the juice from those packets. This machine was about $400 or so. And the subscription was there. It was connected, so it was Wi-Fi enabled. It could read the barcodes on the juice machines and the juice packages that you put in to see if they'd expired. At the time, this was new technology that was quickly adopted by the organization to try and sell. Now, what customers quickly found was that $400 machine wasn't needed. You could buy the juice packages at a very low price. You could squeeze these by hand, and that simply would not need the machine. It probably doesn't come as a surprise that putting technology first like that made that company soon fail. So it went from what might have seen as an innovative product at the time. There was a lot of hype around this type of system, and that very quickly went out of business. So that's an important lesson to learn. The technology might exist, but if it's not applicable, if it's not necessary, if it's not needed for that type of business outcome, then it shouldn't be used. There's a number of different examples in here as well. We've done similar WebExes around specific examples here, so feel free to look through those at your own time as well. So what are we going to actually get out of this session today? Well, I want to quickly go over what we classify as the 5 steps for transformation. Once we go through these, I can start showing you how this might look in ABACUS as well. We also say transformation, but maybe more specifically, we should actually be thinking about the execution here. And a lot of the steps or stages that I will talk about are things that Aaron has already mentioned as the TOGAF ADM. So we are defining the vision, we're auditing our current situation, determining some kind of maturity, so in this case, maybe a digital maturity. We have to be able to measure things, to be able to adjust those, and then we want to make sure that we are able to communicate this to the wider business. So if we start with defining a vision, one of the key things is actually understanding who needs to be involved with this vision. And one of the key areas there again is understanding what the business does. So the classic idea of walking the floor, speaking to departments, finding out what the business is doing, that's going to be one of the key things to build a specific business vision. And this isn't just a general business vision. It could be the vision for specific projects or programs that you're working on. What you're really trying to understand is who's involved, who's using what maybe applications or technologies internally, what processes do we have, what capabilities do we have, and that will then align to the vision that we're actually building. Defining the vision has actually become quite a key thing across our customer sites as well. You need to be able to have this type of information to understand where you're going. So you need to be able to have a vision so that in the future, when you do try to execute that vision, you understand if you've achieved that or if the areas that still need to be improved on. A key thing that ABACUS can help with here is actually trying to integrate this into a single platform. And so we really want to make sure that when we try to define this vision, we're trying to find out all of this information. It's this identification phase that's first. So do we want to maybe bring in all the information that we have from other services that we're using? So importing content from CMDBs, from SharePoint, maybe manually importing some of this information if needed. But we're just trying to build an idea of what we look like. Identifying each of those areas is also important. So when I mention around building the vision, we also at the same time will be building our current situation. So again, centralizing this information and making sure that it's all accessible to users. Defining the current vision is also an important aspect of the frameworks that we use. So TOGAF, of course, being the core one that we're going to be discussing. But it's important to know that TOGAF is a methodology, it's a framework that can be utilized alongside other types of notations and methodologies as well. So certainly if we want to build detailed process diagrams, we might use something like BPMN. We might want to include reference models. We might already have drawings that people have produced in Visio documents that we want to use. The key aspect for the current situation is making sure that there's a shared understanding of all of the content that we have. So we don't really want to be maintaining things manually too much. We want to automate as much of that as possible. Another key area for the current situation is making sure that there's some kind of focus here. So we shouldn't be too broad, let's say, or too vague in the way we capture this information. There's no real need to import all of the content in every CMDB you have just for ABACUS to then just become another CMDB that you have to maintain. So you do need to make sure there's a focus here on the current situation. What is it that we're trying to achieve? What's the vision? How do we get that information into a centralized repository? And then how do we actually use that information going forward? So that's one of the most important aspects of trying to define that current situation. The next step is digital maturity. So digital maturity can span across a number of different areas. So whether it's around the capabilities that we have and the maturity of those, the digital maturity of our strategy is also important, of course, and we want to know if we do have the right technology in place. But technology as a vertical in here can also contain its own sections. So to adjust and measure the maturity, we might want to be thinking about, well, what does our security look like? Do we have the right security protocols in place? Do we have the right controls in place? From a digital channels perspective, do we support customers across our websites, across emails, across phones, across apps? Do we have the right support team in place? Can we actually analyze all of the information that's coming in? There's a number of different resources that you can actually use to understand digital maturity. And that's certainly an area that we can help with and ACD can help with in terms of understanding, are you in the right position potentially to adapt and change and build some of these projects and understand which areas should be worked on going forward. So capturing that current state, defining the vision, having some kind of focus, and again, having some kind of self-awareness of the maturity internally. So that makes sure that we can actually use and execute those types of projects successfully. Now, again, one of the key phrases I guess you'll always hear is if you can't measure it, you can't adjust it in our case. And one of the ideas here is that if you collect this information, you want to, again, understand what type of metrics or KPIs are we capturing. So if, for example, we are capturing information about our applications, we might want to know what data is being passed. How critical is that application to the organization? What kind of strategic recommendation are we making? If we were modeling our processes, we might be more concerned with how often they run. Are they reliable? Are they using systems that maybe aren't secure? Are they accessing data they shouldn't? Are they being performed by multiple departments? This again allows us to adjust our plans going forward. It's very rare that when you define that vision, that it doesn't change over time. And I guess it's important that it does, because the more information you find out, the more you're capturing the information and analyzing that information, the more you're likely to adjust to make sure that you hit the business needs at the end, and maybe don't just blindly follow a plan, knowing that it's probably not going to be successful. A key way maybe of actually capturing some of this as well, which you can see on the screen here, is trying to embed this elsewhere. So for example, you might want to start using ABACUS across other platforms that you're already using, so Confluence and Teams, where people are already working. You want to make sure that they have the ability of updating and creating pieces of work within those platforms and allowing ABACUS to just consume that when necessary. That's a key step for keeping things up to date and current as well. It's about getting other people involved in this data collection. This tends to lead into specific use cases. So for example, if we know who owns or uses the application, then we might want to know which ones are at risk of a cybersecurity attack, perhaps. Which ones are up for rationalization. More these days, which ones are going to be useful for a cloud migration project. So again, measuring this information is key. Now, when we do come to measure that type of metrics or KPI-based approach, one of the ways, of course, is capturing those headline properties or KPIs, as I mentioned. So criticality, recommendation values, life cycle dates, all very important. More important is utilizing some of the powers of no code within ABACUS. And that's the ability of actually performing formula-based or algorithmic-based approaches for calculating the information. So if we have a list of 1,000 applications we've managed, they're connected to multiple capabilities they're supporting, and those capabilities are delivering on the business's vision or values. We might want to run some of these algorithms to understand, well, how complex is that system? How well, maybe from a business or a technical perspective, does that solution fit in to the project plan? And so we can be quite deterministic about these by building algorithms that allows us to calculate these types of values. And this can range across any domain. So the reliability of the infrastructure, the availability of the services we have, the openness of the capability model, the financial metrics, of course, being relatively important in terms of which solution is best suited for us. And that comes down to what we do in comparing scenarios. So Aaron mentioned earlier on, we have this idea of a baseline and a target situation. And that's exactly what we'll likely model in ABACUS. So the baseline being the current state, and then maybe we have multiple target scenarios. So maybe multiple project options. Some are decommissioning apps, some are introducing new ones. Maybe in this case, there are new integrations, interfaces behind the scenes. We can actually model those and use that metrics-based approach to perform a trade-off scenario. So when we do have multiple projects that we're choosing from, are we going to choose that project that is low risk, low cost, and maybe not as efficient as another? Do we choose the project that gives us quicker time to market, but is much more complex and much more difficult to maintain over time? As you go through this trade-off scenario where you try to understand which option do we choose. So this is one of the most important areas of effectively ABACUS and what our customers would actually do. Now, if we actually think about these different scenarios, we can come up with another example here, which is quite an interesting one. Domino's Pizza was an example we used last time, and I think it's relevant again here because Domino's Pizza is an organization, of course, that produces pizza. But what they have become is not just a, let's say, a restaurant business as such, but a technology company. And what they went through was effectively exactly the same situation as this, which is a trade-off scenario of the various options that they had to move forward as a digital technology company. They introduced personalization across their options. Consumers could choose exactly what type of pizza that they wanted. They were the first pizza delivery company to use drones. That was clearly a good trade-off scenario for certain situations, probably more so due to COVID. For delivering those types of pizzas would have been good timing. But certainly that was them pushing the envelope of what they could achieve. They also used AI software internally as a different project. They could actually analyze each pizza that was made and realize if it was good enough and grade those deliveries and pizzas based on that quality. They introduced pizza tracking apps. They have become effectively an e-commerce company that happens to just sell pizza. Now, the key story there is there are a number of different situations that they went through in trade-off scenarios, some successful, maybe some not. But the idea is that transformation project is ongoing. When one transformation happens, another is waiting right behind. And it's very likely that these are happening at the same time. As Aaron mentioned, you maybe have 10, 20 of these projects or programs or situations or scenarios happening. So it's important to adjust that and likely hitting the market at the right time with the right solution. The final step is actually communicating this information. So when it comes to understanding the business vision, capturing the current state, understanding the metrics that we have and how mature we are across these different domains, all of that is fine, but we also need to make sure that we have the ability of allowing anyone in the organization to consume that information. Aaron mentioned earlier on, one of the key areas from the TOGAF perspective there was the inputs being things like the business values and the business vision. What does the business actually do? And there's no way of knowing that unless we're actually communicating this information across the organization. So people want to be able to access the information. They want to know, well, what list of applications are you holding in here? And what processes are you saying they use? If I can see that, I can tell you that I don't use that application, I use this one. Suddenly uncovering a lot of shadow IT that no one really knew about, except for that one person. You also have to be careful about the context that you communicate this in. So the context is key here for the stakeholder. You want to make sure that there's enough depth for certain users and enough coverage for others. You don't want to give all of the information to everyone. You want to make sure that the information that you have and the information that you're giving out to the organization is credible and you're building a real trust in that EA function. You also need to make sure that you're telling a compelling story. There's no need to just post a dashboard with 50 different KPIs and metrics if there's no story behind what you're trying to communicate. You need to make sure that you're using some real examples, providing some options for people to look at, and making sure that you can actually visualize those clearly. And empathy, of course, is understandable as well. You might think that your audience knows what you're talking about, but maybe at times they don't. So you should also make sure that everyone in the organization is involved with any project that's going on. It affects them in some way, whether it's decommissioning of systems, introducing new capabilities, opening up new digital channels or new markets. Most of that content needs to be communicated, and most of it needs to be communicated in a really effective way. Now, there's a number of screenshots that we have in here for showing these types of dashboards, but we're on a live webinar, so it probably only makes sense that we show you some of this live in ABACUS at the same time. So what we have here is an ABACUS Enterprise dashboard. This is one of the ways that you can actually communicate the information that you've built up in the model. And the way this works is that we can effectively build dashboards for different users and different stakeholders. So for example, we might have some users who work in the risk department. So we might only give them access to some of the risk dashboards that we've produced. Now, of course, at the beginning, one of the key areas would be defining the vision. Whether it's the business or the IT vision, they should eventually be aligned in terms of what they're producing. And one arguably may drive the other. But again, by communicating what each department is trying to do, what are the goals we're trying to achieve, what objectives are we trying to hit, what projects and capabilities are we utilizing to reach those types of goals, giving people an idea of the vision of the company and the vision of the projects and programs you're working on will only increase the credibility in the outputs that you then deliver at the end. If we took a very specific view from a technology perspective, I mentioned earlier on, technology shouldn't be the driver here. It should be technology supporting the business. What is important, though, is when you capture this information, you should be able to use it effectively. You shouldn't need to be scouring through hundreds of Visio documents and PowerPoint slides and Excel sheets trying to figure out what's happening. You should start utilizing these types of views. So, for example, we have a list of the web servers that we have internally. So we have an IIS web server and Apache Tomcat server, some of the technologies that we're using internally. Now, as a user, I might want to know more about this IIS server. Well, what does that actually mean? What's it connected to internally? Okay, so there's a number of applications that require this technology. It's supplied by Microsoft. It's also used on a couple of these servers that we have. So this is information that maybe I wasn't aware of, and maybe we can see that the IIS web server is something that should be decommissioned. Maybe Microsoft is stopping supporting this technology. From this view, if IIS was no longer supported by Microsoft and therefore internally we need to shift, we need to make sure that we make changes to this application. But of course, the organization isn't that simple. This CRM application is connected to a number of different databases, services that we're producing, projects that we're working on, interfaces to other applications and departments that use this application. So by communicating this information, not only are we looking at the direct impact of change in one area of the organization, we're seeing the indirect impact elsewhere. And this is the idea that everything on a single platform is connected to each other. So by utilizing something like a graph database in ABACUS, we can actually leverage the ability of seeing all of this information throughout the company. During COVID times, this has been especially useful, certainly for us internally as well, but a lot of customers are hiring, of course, at the same time as trying to build up their model. And when you do have new employees coming on board, one of the first things they might be interested in is knowing more information about the projects that they'll be working on, the services that they'll be introducing, the capabilities or processes that they're developing. And by allowing them to have this as a self-service at their fingertips, make sure that they have a clear understanding of what's going on internally. It also gives them an opportunity to make those changes. So again, by using ABACUS Enterprise, we shouldn't only be visualizing this information, we should be maintaining, we should be updating this information, we should be adding new content to this information. So it's all about communicating and making sure that people have a platform where they can actually model these different situations. Now, communicating those situations is important as well. One of the views that you might want to do that is focused on cost. Cost is always a big driver, so it's always a good topic to start on, really. Of course, there are other KPIs, as I mentioned, reducing complexity, increasing efficiency internally, but cost is always a big driver as well. And what you can see here on the right-hand side are the different projects that we have going on. So we might understand our current TCO, our current cost for our architectures or the current state. And then we might want to know, well, what if we do go through an IVR upgrade project? What does the cost look like after that? What does the cost look like after an application rationalization project? Clearly, after a digital first initiative, those costs increase. So we can start using this to communicate these different solutions we're building so that users can understand the options that are available to them. If needed, they can deep dive into these areas. Why is the cost increasing? Are we introducing new systems? Are there new capabilities or processes we're redesigning? This is part of why we try to centralize all of that content. The other key message here really is in the style of the visualizations. And I don't want to go into this too much, but TOGAF is going to be a key element of how you might use ABACUS. And of course, it's a supported framework. You might be, of course, utilizing the full meta model in TOGAF or parts of this model. And again, seamlessly, you might be building different dashboards for different areas of those phases in TOGAF as well. But one of the key messages here is, regardless of the framework or the methodology or the notation, you want to be able to communicate things well. If you use something like Archimate to draw detailed interface diagrams, there's a lot of notation involved, you understand it as an architect, don't assume that the CIO that you're showing that information to also understands that Archimate diagram. You're using that as a model to build up an output. You've built a solution in Archimate, and your output should be the value of that solution, not the solution itself. So make sure that when you build these types of dashboards, that you are communicating that information effectively and building on that as you go through. One final thing to mention, bringing this again back to the TOGAF methodology in here, is how does it actually relate? I mean, we could take a very simple phase, or phase A in here, the first one, and we can already see how that aligns to some of the key steps that we've identified so far. Defining the vision. TOGAF should be used as a toolbox. It should be used to build some of the models that you're wanting to analyze and understand. Using TOGAF as a toolbox, picking out the areas that you need to use, that's going to mean you can actually execute the projects or solutions much more effectively. Also, at this stage, it's probably worth finishing on one of the key things that TOGAF mentions during one of these phases for the technology phase. And this is something that's evident across all of the content we've been through today, and both myself and Aaron. And that principle within phase D is that only in response to business needs are changes to technology made. So it should never be the other way around. Never introduce technology like Juicero or some of the technologies that NASA have introduced. You should always be making sure that you introduce technologies to business needs.